speech, I spoke about one of my passions, which is improvisational comedy. So for the second speech, I thought I'd talk a bit more about that and what I think composes successful improv, and which I think are three key components: listening, the related elements of trust and support, and finally, authenticity. Before I explore these topics in further detail, I want to give you a bit of background on what improvisational comedy is. So everyone understands what I'm talking about, may have some familiarity with it, or you may not know about it at all, but hopefully with my explanation you'll have a bit more of an understanding. Has anyone seen Whose Line Is It Anyway? Or Curb Your Enthusiasm? So these are shows that both employ comedy, improv comedy. For Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's short form, and short form is typically focused around games. In Curb Your Enthusiasm, the show is generally fleshed out and structured ahead of time. Most of the lines are written, but a few are improvised, so there is that element of improv as well. For what I'm discussing, it's long-form improvisational comedy, which is everything is completely made up. Nothing you see is prepared ahead of time. And it's usually a 20 to 30 minute show. There can be generally 5 to 8 improvisers on stage in front of an audience. The show usually begins with some sort of suggestion from the audience, which can be a line of dialogue or a relationship with two people. And then you'll see a series of scenes made up by these improvisers on stage. And while the number of people on stage can range from one person to all members of the troupe, I'm going to talk about the dynamic between two people on stage. So the first element of successful improv, in my view, is listening. And this, people might think, no, it should be, the most important thing is being funny. It's all about comedy, right? But I think listening is critical because it allows you to respond to what's happening on stage. Oftentimes, beginning improvisers will come on stage and think very hard about what they're going to say next. It's hard being on stage, as we all know. It's hard thinking about what you're going to say extemporaneously. But really, the most important thing is to listen to what your scene partner says and then respond appropriately. Because if you aren't listening and then you say something that may have been hilarious 5 seconds ago, but now makes no sense and falls flat, you'll be completely thrown off and it can affect your performance for the rest of the show. So I say listening is one critical component of successful improv. And I think improv relates to friendships, and I'll draw this conclusion at the end, but as we all know, one critical component of friendships is listening to your friends. So successful friendships, successful improv, listening. The second element, support and trust, relates to listening because by listening and responding, you demonstrate your support. In improv, we use a term called yes and. And yes and is basically describing a situation in which you agree with what your scene partner is saying, and then you take what that person says even further. Yes and. And I think this concept can best be demonstrated by an example, if you'll indulge me. So let's say there are 2 improvisers on stage, my scene partner and myself. My scene partner says, "Here's your hat." "That's not my hat, that's my grandmother." Okay, not a very inventive scene, not very creative, but what it demonstrates is the lack of yes and. Instead of running with what my scene partner said, I negated it, and the audience, while they might think, okay, this is kind of absurd, kind of strange, maybe it's an altered reality, they're a little bit confused. The scene partners are very confused, and we don't have any foundation upon which we can build a scene. So let's try that again using the concept of yes and. Taking what my scene partner says and then taking it further. "Here's your hat." "I love that hat, my grandmother gave it to me." Now we have something to work with. the scene partner agreed with what the first person offered and then took it further. We have no idea what this scene could be about. It could be about two Southern belles going to a party. It could be about two baseball players about to run out on the field. It could be Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln about to see a play. We have no idea. But what it is a demonstration of yes and the idea that these two people are working together to piece by piece build a scene. The final component of improv that I think relates to successful improv and also relates to successful friendships is being authentic. Beginning improvisers may think that the most important thing is to be funny. And maybe by being funny, if I come out with a funny accent or if I have a funny walk on stage, that will automatically be humorous to the audience. When in reality, I think it's more important to relax into the scene, to listen to what your scene partner is saying, and then have an honest reaction. In improv, we talk a lot about truth in comedy, and the fact that if you're honest in your reactions to what's happening on stage, your audience can identify with it, and the funny will emerge, and it will be that much better because it is so honest. So, to conclude, I think improv is a great way to express yourself, to be entertained if you're in the audience, and the critical components of that, of successful improv, are listening, trust and support, and authenticity. And as I mentioned earlier, how I think this relates to friendship, among friends, you often have phrases or jokes that you say to each other that become inside jokes. Well, if you employ these different components for improv, you can create these inside jokes with the audience. You can reference some sort of funny line or some sort of funny action that happened earlier in the show, and the audience then becomes a part of that. Thank you very much.